We have already formed a quorum. Let's invite the witnesses to join us. Today, we are short of 2 members. Mr. Ng Leung Sing is out of town, and Raymond Wong is also not in Hong Kong. So, good morning, Bureau Director. I haven't really extended my welcome to you because I was going to invite you to have breakfast at one of the cooked food stores. I actually would like to take him to one of those shops to have breakfast. Okay, we have already formed a quorum. We'd like to welcome the Bureau Director and Cherry representing the Bureau and your team. Our warmest welcome to them all. Today, we are holding this public hearing on report number 64, Chapter 3, Public Cooked Food Markets managed by the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department. Members responsible for this chapter is Mr. Alan Leung. So Mr. Leung will be the first to ask questions. Is there any interest to be declared by members? If not, then we can get started. Dr. Koh, do you have any opening question? Yes? All right. The floor is now open to you. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. Sorry, Chairman. Do you have a script? Can you give us a copy? Actually, we've been reminded to give a copy, but then as only the colleague at the office will only be able to provide a clean copy. As for the one that we have in hand, is a marked up one. So, first of all, Chairman, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here to give a response to the audit report with regard to the proposed improvements by the audit director. On the whole, we accept the recommendations made by the audit, including public cooked food markets and cooked food centers, as well as cooked food hawker bazaars management measures. We have actually implemented some of the measures, and we are considering how we can implement the rest. We agree that for cooked food hawker bazaars with a high vacancy rate, we should come up with an exit plan in order to see how we can make the best use of the site. And also for such a CFHB in temporary sites, actually they are already meant to be transitional measures. That's why initially there was no intention of making them permanent. That's why starting from 1990, in general circumstances, the administration has already stopped the issue of new hawker licenses, so that for the licensees who have surrendered their licenses because of death or other reasons, there will not be any new issue of licenses. That's why the vacancy rate has gone up. This is a natural process. During the past 10 years, the FEHD has closed down 3 cooked food hawker bazaars, and we have adopted a more inclusive approach. That is, we have borne in mind that most of the operators are actually from the grassroots. That's why the government tries not to evict them so as to give rise to social controversy or animosity. That's why if you look at the issue from the value for money perspective with regard to the 3 sites that can be surrendered so that there can be further redevelopment, we accept the audit recommendation, and we will step up our efforts so that we will be looking at individual CFHB's experience and also the demand by the local community, and also with adequate resources, we will try our best to come up with improvement plans and also exit plans so as to ensure that precious land resources can be put to better use. And we will also look at the impact of the closure of such markets on the stakeholders. We will also be exploring other sites redevelopment potential, in particular for sites with high vacancy rate and also with operational difficulties, and also if there are also constraints for improvements. So instead of so that we will be able to set aside the land for further redevelopment. With regard to fire safety and also store management and also charges and rentals, some recommendations have also been made. We'll be implementing them shortly. And I'll be deferring to my colleague to give you further details. With regard to various measures involving value for money, we will consider them very seriously and we will listen to your views very carefully. We will support the work of the Audit Commission and we will take follow-up measures as necessary. Thank you for your opening statement. Yes, Director, you'd like to say something too? And what about your speech? Can you give a copy to us later? Yes, I will. All right. Good morning, Chairman and members. As the Bureau Director just said, on the whole, we accept the recommendations made by the audit on the management of cooked food markets run by the department, and we will look into how we can implement the measures. And first of all, let me briefly report to members as to the FEHD's in terms of cooked food center, cooked food markets and so on. With regard to the recommendations, what we're going to do concerning market facilities, the audit recommends that the FEHD should step up the efforts to install fire safety facilities there, and we are following up on that closely. In the 19 cooked food centers and cooked food markets, we have already introduced some measures to improve fire safety. So for the remaining cooked food markets and also cooked food hawker bazaars, we will be implementing these measures. And after the release of the audit report, together with the FSD and also the EMSD, we have started to review the public venues fire safety. And as far as possible, we will try to upgrade the relevant fire safety in these venues. And for irregularities detected, we will take follow-up action. And if there is any cooked food markets or cooked food centers or even CFHB's operators who fail to comply with the requirements, we will revoke the license or terminate the tenancy agreement. In terms of electricity supply, the FEHD will work with the Architectural Services Department to review the individual centers and also bazaars to see if electricity supply is adequate. And for venues which do not have adequate electricity supply, we will look at the feasibility and also cost effectiveness of improving electricity supply to these venues. If it's feasible, we will follow up on this with the relevant department. But then if the assessment is that it's not appropriate or it's not possible to upgrade the electricity supply, then we will work together with the relevant departments and we will come up with guidelines on the use of electrical appliances, and we will also be updating the relevant guidelines on a regular basis. On air conditioning, we will be working together with the relevant departments to improve the power supply for these venues, and also in following up on any suggestion to upgrade the facilities, we will also talk to the stakeholders. We will also step up inspection so that we will remind the operators if they before they install any standalone air conditioners, they will have to get our approval before, in order to ensure that the installations would not exceed the loading, the power loading for the particular venue. And also in terms of market management, we will be reviewing whether or not the facilities at the CFM and also CFCs are adequate, and also whether or not the safety requirements have been met. And we will also step up inspection to ensure that they will not be blocking public areas or selling liquor without a license, and also making use of the communing seating for other purposes, for example, the operation of food factories and so on, as pointed out by the audit. And the non-compliant tenants will also be punished. With regard to the deputies to licensed hawkers, we will remind all the relevant colleagues to enforce it strictly, so that upon the expiry of the appointment, the licensed hawker must continue to run the store. Unless there are specific reasons, they can also apply to extend the appointment of the deputies or to appoint another deputy, or else the FEHD would not consider extending the deputy's appointment once, or to allow for another application for the appointment of a deputy. And also for the inspection of these venues, we will ensure that the staff would comply with the requirements to follow up on the situation, and would also make sure that the operators would rectify the problems, and also follow-up inspections would also be carried out. And if there are any irregularities, warning letters or enforcement action will be taken. We will also ensure that they will follow the guidelines of the department, so that they would carry out on-site inspection, and proper records should also be made. And we will also be stepping up the inspection numbers of these cooked food hawker bazaars, and also follow closely the guidelines. In terms of rentals and charges, the FEHD agrees with the audit recommendation concerning the adjustment mechanism, and also the recovery of rates, and also air conditioning charges. Earlier on, in the relevant markets, under the mechanism, under the recommendation to recover the air conditioning charges, as we have not been able to get the support from this council, we will continue to come up with a relevant, an appropriate recovery mechanism in order to recover the air conditioning charges and rates. We will continue to follow up on the other recommendations by the audit, and we will also take it of your advice, and we will also do our best to support your work. We have just received a copy of the Bureau Director's opening statement. And Director, you've talked about some of the existing policies and measures, and the Bureau Director also talked about the macro policy. So there are a number of points which we might have to follow up on. So can you give us a copy of your speech? Because that will facilitate our questioning, and we also hope to complete this public hearing this morning. All right. Yes, Alan, now you have 20 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, first of all, I have to confirm that 2 years after Dr. Koh has assumed office, on public markets and also hawker policy, Dr. Koh has maintained a very good interaction with this council. Previously, at least since I joined this council, during the first 2 terms, we had not been able to get anywhere. But then, since Dr. Koh took office, he is more willing to respond to our requests, and he is also willing to discuss with us some recommendations made by the FEH panel. But then, as you are aware, whether it's about the Public Market Subcommittee or the Hawker Policy Subcommittee, the 2 subcommittees have been working on hawker policy, and the Bureau Director has submitted a paper, or whether it's the Public Market Subcommittee. We are also looking forward to his consultancy report. In both cases, the review and the policy do not include cooked food.
Yes.
So, the Director of Audit did this audit on cooked food markets. I think it's a very timely study. We do hope that the government can, from the value for money perspective, understand that public resources really, when it comes to cooked food, actually should make improvements in terms of the allocation of resources. Hong Kong is a food paradise. Chairman, if you go to various districts, you see that since Link bought the majority of shopping malls in public estates, if you are a public housing estate resident and want to have a breakfast in these shopping malls, you have to pay more than $20 now. That's the reality. Well, Hong Kong is a food paradise, and from the value for money perspective, looking at the amount of resources allocated, provided for biological, for the purpose of providing affordable food to Hong Kong people, and to really let people, who have the cooking skills to make a living. We wonder, really, we do hope, there is really a better enhancement of value for money. So I hope that my observation can actually be the starting point for this number 64 report. Number 64 report, Chapter 3. And I also hope that the Secretary can understand that if you want to enhance this policy on cooked food, particularly in terms of provision of these food in cooked food centers and markets, it's not just the bureau, your bureau alone, that can tackle this. So I hope that our audit report this time, following the scrutiny of PAC, can help the Secretary, within the administration, to try to put pressure on the administration and arouse the attention of the Chief Secretary, and hope that we can get a job done well. And Chairman, I'd like to ask a question. As I pointed out just then, the hawker policy and the hawker policy committee and the MMCC does not include any people from the cooked food sector. So from this report for value for money, does the administration plan to make an extra effort so that our annual allocation of funding to the Bureau or resources to the Bureau can indeed actually be made better use of, for the provision of cooked food? Secretary, thank you for your question and direction raised. On the whole, the Secretary at the Bureau actually is moving towards the direction as what's mentioned by you. Even though, as Mr. Leung said, he said it right, that in terms of our hawker policy and policy for public markets, in our discussions, and then we didn't really focus on cooked food. But if you mention that we didn't really touch upon cooked food, that's not the case. When we review the public markets, we actually look at them as a whole. And in a number of public markets, there were cooked food centers. So we wouldn't neglect the cooked food centers at all. On the other hand, in reviewing our hawker policy, even though our direct objective did not relate to, what we are going to talk about today, cooked food per se, but we have made proposals related to cooked food. For example, we mentioned that in some markets with high vacancy rates, we would consider turning part of the areas into cooked food markets. So we do think that of the two policy areas, you can't really separate them from cooked food provision. So against this background, so on the various types of cooked food facilities mentioned in the report today, I think apart from the cooked food hawker bazaars, let me point out that, of course, we do welcome views from members and the committee. But let me tell you about the historical background. The first type, that is the cooked food hawker bazaars. Some years ago, when these bazaars were set up, the purpose was to make this a transitional measure. So according to the regional intent, in terms of development, there is a policy constraint. Despite that, I think our response to the Director of Audit's report is that we are fully flexible. On the one hand, very much agree that, particularly for hawker bazaars with low utilization rate and little potential for development, I agree that we should step up our effort to release these sites. On the other hand, we also agree that for some places that have room for movement in terms of facilities and operating well, if they don't have not enough facilities, then we'll try to get resources to improve them. So on the whole, as Mr. Liang said, well, I agree with the direction you pointed out. On the whole, thank you. Chairman, I think we can move into part two. Alan, before you ask questions, I think, I think not all members are clear with the report. Can you just brief us on the three types of centers? You have the cooked food hawker bazaars, cooked food centers, cooked food markets, right? I think many people may not be clear about what we are talking about. So I'd like to give you time to do some explanation, right? So people know what we are discussing. Yes, I think for this report number 64, chapter 3, about the cooked food hawker bazaars, it actually lists out three types of cooked food markets that are in existence in Hong Kong. One is the market that have hawker licenses, the cooked food hawker bazaars. Under the cooked food hawker bazaars, people who operate the stores there are all hawkers with licenses. The other type is with what's called cooked food markets. There are 25 of them. 11 of them are cooked food hawker bazaars, 25 are cooked food markets, 39 are cooked food centers. Cooked food markets are here to help the food and environmental. Actually, they are renting stores from the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department to provide cooked food, but they don't have hawker licenses. But if these food markets are attached to a public market, then they will be called cooked food centers. Under the audit report, there are 39 of them in existence now. So, cooked food that are being provided, basically, these are places where cooked food provided, besides in restaurants, hotels, and so forth. Just then, the secretary mentioned that from the start, the policy for these areas is just for, well, there's a transitional policy, and the transitional policy is only applied to the 11 cooked food hawker bazaars. Just then, the secretary asked us then, the fact that since the cooked food hawker bazaars is a transitional arrangement, so he was implying that, well, there are vacancies there, and not all the stores, the hawker bazaars, are actually in operation. So it's sort of something expected to him, but still, from the perspective of value for money, if there are stores or areas that are due to be turned over to the government and yet they are still there, not turned over to the government yet. Let me give you some examples. Secretary, as a witness, please go to paragraph 2.5. Paragraph 2.5, there's a case 1. Where it's mentioned that where it mentions the Union Street and Market Street hawker bazaars, both of them are located in Tsuen Wan, each providing 36 pitches to get 72 pitches. So they are the biggest hawker bazaars. The result of the audit report shows that if you can look at case 1, from December 31, 2004 onwards, Marcotte Street, there were 21 vacant stores and 22 vacant stores in Union Street, 21 in Marcotte Street. In 2014, 10 years later, there are 27 vacant stores in Marcotte Street, 29 vacant stores in Union Street. That is altogether, combining the two bazaars, 43 10 years ago, and now there are 56 vacant stores altogether in those two places. In late December 2014, the FEHD was exploring the feasibility of releasing some CFHB sites by relocating operators and consolidating CFHBs with high vacancies. In 2004, the Audit Commission's finding is that there are altogether 29 stores occupied in the two CFHBs, and all these 29 stores could possibly be housed in either of the two CFHBs, because both are in proximity to each other in Tsuen Wan. So indeed, the FEHD could have taken more timely action to explore the relocation or consolidation. So I'd like to hear from the secretary or director can assist him. How come that these two bazaars, in Marcotte Street and Union Street, they're all in Tsuen Wan? Why can't they be consolidated to release at least one of the sites for the to the government for other purposes? Secretary? Okay, let me respond. Well, yes, it is a fact that, as Mr. Liang mentioned, fact discovered as mentioned in the report, we agree that there's a need to vacate some vacant stores or bazaars. One of the options, of course, apart from asking the licensed hawkers to move out, is, as mentioned by Mr. Liang, is to have consolidation. Of course, even with consolidation, my understanding is that the administration, when they consulted the hawkers or negotiate with them, the hawkers might actually put up resistance, because to us, we think that the two markets are close to each other, but to the hawkers, some may think that they prefer to stay in a more familiar environment, and they may also have the same view on the operating environment in both markets. So even though there is this favorable environment for consolidation, I understand that when a department carries out the work, it may not be that easy for them. Therefore, in the past years, the administration has tried to be more tolerant, and in order to avoid any disputes. But my understanding is that the FEHD has decided to step up its work to actively, including in relation to the cases you mentioned, that the department will try to find the way to vacate the space as soon as possible. The director, would you like to explain further on these two locations? Well, because there are vacant stores there in these two centers, so for the stores that are still in operation, is it because of market demand there? If there's a market demand, then what about combining the two bazaars together, and would that affect the existing hawker stores? I mean, if the consolidation is done, what impact would it have on the hawkers? Thank you, Chairman. FEHD in 2011, we commissioned a consultant to look at. Can you speak close to the mic, please? Yes, as I mentioned, In 2011, we commissioned a consultant to carry out a study on our markets and cooked food centers, their viability. We looked at the number of people, on a daily basis using the facilities there. And after the consultancy study was done, we did have plans to indeed close some of the markets. Among them, there's one actually mentioned in case 1, a market mentioned in case 1. So we are doing similar work now, and sometimes, when it comes to the future use of existing market sites, we need to consider, from a planning perspective, and consider whether there's a potential at a site for bigger development. Sometimes once you've released a site, some planning considerations or planning factors may not allow for a large-scale redevelopment of the same site. So we need to consider what should our priorities be. In case 1, there's this mention of the 2 bazaars. One of them actually is really within our plan for closure due to the limited number of users and the operating environment, unfavorable operating environment. And on the other hand, we are also actively considering how we should develop the other sites. In the consultancy report, both hawker bazaars actually have only very, very limited business. So if you are to redevelop one of them, well, we have to consider would it mean that whether the stores in the other market would be willing to move to the remaining market, and even for the redeveloped market, what would the future business be? We do have doubts about that as well. Alan. Yes, I'd like to give other members the chance to ask questions in the first round. So I'm not going to follow up yet, but just then I heard from Director. I think her responses may evoke me some unpleasant memories, because in the last legislative term, during our PhD meetings on the issue of audit of public markets, because in the market there's the mention of recovering market rentals and why the rates not charged and so forth. Well, we were talking to the then secretary, and we were used by the then administration as reasons for charging market rentals without improving the operating environment. The result was that some hawker stores had to jump off from a bridge. I think you can still remember what happened. I don't know what other PSC committee members have their views, but I really like to put on record here. We're not saying that the secretary should, at all costs, immediately clear all the stores in the bazaars or markets. I do hope that we can have a policy that is still people-oriented and the policy can be continued. But even if you're having people-oriented policy, ultimately you need to have a clear policy, because even for the Audit Commission, Secretary, if you don't agree, you would say it, but I think the Audit Commission actually made these observations based on the pronounced government policy. If, for example, in terms of the operation of cooked food markets, hawker bazaars, cooked food centers, if you have any new policy direction, I believe that the Director of Audit would look at the issue from that perspective.
明白。
I hope the Secretary can understand this point, and he should be careful. And the reports he mentioned were from 2003 and 2008. I'm sure everyone knows that your policies are always people-oriented. So we are only raising this issue from a value for money perspective. Chairman, I don't doubt the Secretary's capabilities, but I'm just trying to raise this issue up front. Mr. Paul Chair, Gary Chan. Of course, when we talk about people-oriented, we have to think about public interest. In terms of policy execution, compared with other countries or cities, is there really an imminent need for repositioning? And we have to balance the interests of different stakeholders in our community. And in terms of executing the policy, has the administration considered any possible violent reactions from the stakeholders, and would that be an excuse for not executing certain policies? So that's something we want to find out. When we look at Table 2 on the vacancy rates, Mr. Leung talked about the 3 different types of cooked food facilities and their respective numbers. And for cooked food hawker bazaars, they require hawker licenses. What are the differences in the requirements between the 3 types of hawker facilities apart from hawker licenses? In terms of scope, rental, restrictions on operating hours, are there any differences? Secretary or Director, please. Chairman, I'll just share what I know. As Mr. Leung pointed out, among the 3 types of facilities, cooked food centers are often attached to public markets under the ambit of the FEHD. So in other words, they are housed in a building. And for the 2 other types, the hawker bazaars and markets, they're located on the streets as well. But very often they are not housed in proper buildings. They take the form of simple buildings. So perhaps the Director can give more. As Mr. Allen Leung said, cooked food centers are more readily recognized by the public because they are attached to public wet markets. For cooked food hawker bazaars, because of historical reasons, most of them were built in the 1970s or 80s, and they were located on the streets. And so, as such, the buildings were rather simple in design. And when the street stalls were, when the on-street hawkers were recited, because of time constraints, very often these facilities only had a roof, a very simple roof, and the other constructions were often done by the hawker owners themselves. And for cooked food markets, we have 52 of them, 25 of them rather. Their scopes vary quite considerably depending on the time of construction. And for the 2 latest cooked food markets, they are separate. They are independent buildings. One is located in Queen Street in Central, and another is located near Langham Place in Mong Kok. And usually they have separate constructions. And for cooked food markets, which were opened early, they would be similar to hawker bazaars. One good example is the Changsha Wan cooked food market. you have a chance to pass by, they are not closed buildings, but rather caged constructions of sorts. So so there are great varieties. I'd like to declare my interest. The director talked about the Queen Street market, and I was involved in the consultation stage before its opening. Apart from differences in their history, what about rental and other factors? For cooked food, hawker bazaars, licenses are issued on an individual basis, and license fees are charged. And every year we would charge about $28,000, and it includes the license fee and venue usage. And this has been mentioned in the audit report. And the annual fee of about $28,000 is a fixed fee. So regardless of the venue, no matter where they are located, the hawker license fee would be the same. For the two other types of facilities, the CFHBs and CFMs, we would sign contracts with them. For facilities which were recited during the early days, concessionary fees were often offered for bidding. And during that time, we took reference from the open market rental, or OMR. And the rate and valuation department would look at the situation of the specific market before making a valuation. For stores which were recited in the early days, they would pay less. And after 1998, we have not increased the rental levels, and so the rentals have remained at a low level. And in the CFMs and CFCs, whenever there are vacant stores, our current practice is that they would be open for rental. And the RVD would assess a reasonable level of rental. And for those, for instance, for more recent rents, the rentals would be closer to the current rate. It really depends on the time, on the timing of moving in. Did you mean that you haven't issued any new hawker licenses since the 1970s? And the second thing is that the existing vacancy rate of market stores is very high. So can you explain that to Mr. Chair? Because we have to write our report later. Please give us your facts, including the historical reasons. Why do we have such a high vacancy rate of 61%? If you can elaborate on that, then you can make things easier for us. Permanent Secretary, please. I used to be confused as well on what Mr. Chair said, but after putting the matter in historical context, we can better understand the situation. Let's turn to page 4 of the audit report, table 1. When you look at the timeline, basically, since the 1980s, there haven't been any public cooked food markets. And it showed that since the 1970s, no new hawker licenses have been issued by the government. And at that time, the former municipal councils still allowed the transfer of hawker licenses to the owner's spouses and children. And a provisional municipal council and district councils were established, and they were discussing the issue of the transfer of licenses. So the existence of these food markets had a historical context, and during the 1980s, the licenses were often transferred to relatives. And as the years advanced and the facilities transitioned to hawker bazaars and cooked food centers, and even though we have no more hawker stores, it simply means their roles have changed. Their identities and legal positions have changed. They still operate as in the past, but only in a different manner. And with the advancement of our community, the hardware and facilities have improved. When you look at page 30 and 33 in the audit report, on the electricity supply and the presence of air conditioning, these aspects have changed, and there has been a lot of upgrades in these regards. We need electricity before the stores can expand. And on the issue of rental, as the Secretary said, we have, again, a lot of historical context. And the government wants to avoid accusations of corruption and so on at all costs. So open tenders are always conducted. Hong Kong values a harmonious and people-oriented society. So we would we will organize restricted auctions for the store owners. And in terms of the air conditioning system, and we could see the different treatments accorded by the former municipal councils. The district municipal councils try to change some existing measures, for example, on the air conditioning charges. And before the year 2005, the air conditioning fees were integrated into the total costs, and they were later separated for the sake of clarity. For rates, the RVD would conduct evaluations based on the entire market. And having read the audit report, we would try to rationalize our practice. So in terms of legal obligation, rates and rental are two entirely different things. Rates must be paid no matter what. So we have begun discussions with the RVD. And I do agree that we need to iron out certain issues, having read this report. Paul, I'd like to thank the director and PS for clarifying the matters. When we have a chance later, we will try to know more about the three types of cooked food facilities, and I have 4 questions. The financial secretary raised the idea of the very creative idea of food carts, and but with the high vacancy rates at the CFHBs, CFMs, and CFCs, would his proposal be misplaced? Let's look at the cooked food markets. When we look at Table 2, the average vacancy rate is 61%, and according to Table 3, as Mr. Leung said, at Markov Street and Yunming Street, these are two very big CF M's, the vacancy rates are 75% and 81% respectively. And under the circumstances, if we have a temporary measure in place according to the permanent secretary, why don't we allow these store owners to move into better equipped cooked food centers with better facilities? If you can provide policy concessions, you can lower the vacancy rates. Have you considered these, Secretary? We feel that this is a viable measure, but for affected store owners and hawkers, apart from considering concessions, they have other things to think about as well. For example, their own network and so on. So we will consider this measure, but we are aware that they have other considerations as well. Well, I understand the administration's people-oriented policy, but as far as reprovisioning goes, we would hope that they can be reprovisioned in their own districts, but in some cases they have to be moved to another district. Of course, so under such circumstances, we cannot just consider one factor. When we look at Table 4, in Type 1, in this first type, CFHBs, for 95% of the stores have a vacancy period of over 5 years. And even if you give them enough time or arrange transitional arrangement, over 95 of the stores have vacancy periods of 5 years or above. So I think there is ample time for them. So why can't you give them some room for maneuvering? As I mentioned, we would use an open and accepting manner, and if possible, we won't ask them to move. And in cooked food markets with high vacancy rates, the government would try to use different means, including consolidation, to free up the space for other developments. Secretary, are you providing any incentives for these licensed store owners? You know, just like in the civil service, you have some incentive packages for leavers. And at that time, I recall that you have provided some subsidies for these owners. And now, since these stores are taking on valuable land, would you provide any incentives or ex gratia payments? Have you considered this possibility from a value of money perspective? We would consider this possibility. But of course, I cannot promise to you today what we are going to do. But I agree that incentives are one way to go.
That would also help to recover or resume those sites for further redevelopment. That's one of the ways to go for. But then from the perspective of assessing how resources are being used, we are just making this as a suggestion for you to consider. Yes, Permanent Secretary. Well, for these CFHB, well, most of them were constructed either in or before 1970s. For example, out of the 11 operators, and 9 are already over 70 years old. And if you tell them that you will have to be recited to another location. Well, some might be willing to do so if you give them some compensation. Others would find it difficult because it's not just about whether they are willing to do so, but then their social network might be lost entirely if they move to a new place. That's why we have tried to adopt a more accommodating approach because some of them are already over 90. But then still we have to look at the location and other factors. And as the Honourable Member just said, for example, near Marcock Street, there are other cooked food centres like Lun Yan Street, and the vacancy rate is over 80%. So with the two high vacancy markets, are we trying to merge them into one, or are we trying to close one of them? So there are a basket of factors to be considered. Yes, just now the Bureau Director said that you would try to be as inclusive as possible. You try to accommodate them, but then the further you drive the screw, the situation might become worse. So in your statement, apparently you are taking it rather strictly. Chairman, actually, that's not the case. In fact, the Bureau Director is very concerned about this, and he has been talking to the Director on various occasions. And in response to some questions raised by members, the Director was trying to explain the situation. It's not that we're trying to relax our enforcement. So you gave us the impression that the room for maneuvering for these hawkers would be narrowing. Well, if I understand it correctly, then maybe the Director can explain it a bit further. So the Director was talking about the recommendations made by the audit on management of hawkers. But then I think that would also bring out the problem, that is we don't want the PAC to give you the excuse to drive them away. Because I think the outset is right. That is we are all trying to help them, and we don't want the administration to use us as an excuse for affecting these people. That's not our intention. Thank you, Chairman, for reiterating what Mr. Allen Lau just said. I believe that we can make it clear that we are not going to do that. Well, yes, whether it's the Audit Commission or the PAC making reasonable recommendations, we will consider them fully. But then it doesn't necessarily mean that we would be rationalizing what we're going to do in the future, which might appear to be rather stringent and harsh. Mr. Paul Chair, thank you for succinctly pointing out that that's the direction that I'd like the administration to take. So even if you go to the extreme, of course, that's a direction to consider. Of course, we can also offer incentives or extra payments to those over 70. Maybe they should retire. So, well, I'm 70. I still have not retired. Well, Chairman, what you do is relatively easy. So you have to use your brain, but then you don't have to engage in hard labor. But then for many elders, very often, they should be given an incentive so that they would not have to put up with such a hard labor work. Yes, I was joking. Yes, I understand it, says Mr. Paul Chair. But then we also have to take into account humanitarian considerations. So would it mean that if we are overly accommodating, then we might be condoning to certain activities, and some might even think that this kind of concession will continue, and therefore they might not retire even if they should, and therefore we might have to tighten up the approach. For example, some elders would also have to move out of the original housing estate, and their social network would also be lost. So once again, I'd like to say that I'm not forcing you to take immediate action against them. But then in the past, we have dragged our feet for too long, and the transitional period has been too long, and the accommodation has been too broad. That's why some people are saying that, well, for the difference between tenants and licensee, I think if you're authorized, so long as you give reasonable notice, then you can always scrap the authorization. And therefore, even if we respect the rule of law, we do not have to give them special accommodation. So I think that's the spirit of this hearing, and that's the overall direction. I hope that you can step up your efforts, and we will also try our best to help you. Bureau Director, as Mr. Chair, talk about the incentive, and I can also think about the following. Well, as the Director just explained, there are two types. One, would be the so-called store tenants, and for store tenants, it would be somewhat easier to deal with them upon the expiry of the tenancy agreement. There is nothing that they can hang on to say that we have to renew their tenancy agreement. But then for those with hawker licenses, then in terms of our handling of them, that would be somewhat more difficult. In the past, on different occasions, we have also introduced what Mr. Porcher just suggested. We offer some incentives. For example, if they are willing to surrender their licenses voluntarily, then we would give them an ex gratia payment, and such ex gratia payments would be rather generous. But then we also have to strike a balance, because the incentive, well, how generous should it be? We also have to consider the impact on the public finances. That's why even if we offer something which might already be somewhat higher than what we offered in the past, whether it would be sufficiently high to attract these existing licensees to surrender their licenses. Sometimes there might be a gap between what we offer and what they expect, but then incentives is definitely something that we will have to consider. Mr. Porcher, I'd just like to add a word. Well, we try to go to the extreme. For example, for anti-Northeast, despite the controversy, we still insisted on doing this. And also when we try to come up with pencil buildings by scrambling for land, and when there are so many people out there, I think we should offer better incentives so that land can be recovered for building public housing and so on. So I hope that Bureau Director, you would understand this. We understand what you said, so I think both of us should work harder instead of allowing this transitional arrangement to continue forever. Yes, Mr. Gary Chen. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I also agree with what you said just now. But today's hearing is trying to look at the issue from the value for money perspective. And of course, just now, some of these hawker bazaars are run by grassroots hawkers. That's why the Bureau Director said that we should be more accommodating and we should take into account other factors. But then this is not a shield for all, and therefore it doesn't mean that we would not be making good use of our land resources. That's why I'll be focusing on these CFHB and also CFCs and also CFMs and their vacancy rates. So I'd like to refer the Bureau Director to Table 3 in the report. Sorry, I didn't get you. Table 3 on page 11. On page 11 of the English version. I agree with what the Permanent Secretary just said. There are some CFMs where the operators might already be rather old, and also the mode of operation relies heavily on the social network. That's why some of these elderly hawkers might not be willing to move to other districts or other CFHBs. But then sometimes the CFHBs are very close to one another. So even if the two are merged, they do not have to go to another district. I can give you some figures for your consideration. For example, Marcock Street CFHB, the vacancy rate is 75%, and then next to it we have Lunian Street, and the vacancy rate is 81%, and the distance between the two is 6 minutes walk. And then Jordan Road, Wusong Street, temporary CFHB, vacancy rate 25%, Shanqi Street, 70%, so it's just 3 minutes walk. And then Kwai Wing Road, CFHB, vacancy rate 75%, Tai Lin Pai Road, 82%, and the distance between the two is 8 minutes. So, Chairman, as you can see, for these CFHBs, they can be paired up, and if you compare them, it in fact is within walking distance, within 10 minutes. And yet, if you look at the high vacancy rate, it's actually a waste of land resources. So has the administration considered this? For the CFHBs that I just mentioned, can you consolidate them? Because the current high vacancy rate is a waste of land resources. Do you agree? Bureau Director? Chairman, as we have pointed out, we agree that the direction to take is that for the CFHBs with high vacancy rates, we should step up our efforts so that they can be vacated as soon as possible. And several members have successively asked about case 1, the 2 CFHBs, and actually we are moving in that direction already. We hope that as soon as possible we can do it. But then as to how that can be done on the ground, and for the affected licensed hawkers, in fact, definitely we'll be giving them these choices. And one of the choices is to surrender their licenses, or they can also choose to go to another appropriate location nearby. Bureau Director, just now the Permanent Secretary already made it clear. And Mr. Chen, we cannot just measure it by walking distance, 6 minutes or 8 minutes, and everything can be done on the basis of land resources. I think they also have their rights, or in fact, if they already had that right since the 70s, and if the policy is to protect their rights, so they are exercising their rights as licensed hawkers. So we will have to be extremely careful. That's why the Bureau Director also answered that question. And I believe that the administration would be able to adopt a people-based approach in resolving this problem. On the one hand, we can get back the resources. On the other, we'll be able to meet the overall social interests. In this regard, my personal view might be somewhat different from other members, but then I hope that that can be realized in terms of our policy. Mr. Gary Chairman, I also agree that we should adopt a more people-based approach, but then if you look at the distance between the two, it's indeed very close. Even if you have to relocate, or even if you have some reciting plan, and even if we offer them with some express payment scheme, that would still be attractive enough so that we can recover the precious land resources. And also, I'd like to ask about the CFM and also CFC. Yes, in the report, well, for CFM, the vacancy rate is only 6%, and then for CFC, the vacancy rate is 3%. But then, I think it's just a pretty superficial figure, because if you look at Table 5 more closely, then actually you can see that for the Changsha 1 CFM, the vacancy rate is up to 57%, and then for the Choi Hong Road vacancy rate is 32%, and then for Eldridge Bay is also a quarter. So you can see that with such high vacancy rates, it means that they have also not made very good use of our land resources. And in Para 2.9, it says that there are 9 public cooked food markets which were built on temporary sites between, using some 4,850 square meters. But then these so-called temporary sites, well, they've been temporary for 30 to 42 years. So my question is, has the administration considered this? That is, for these temporary CFMs with a high vacancy rate, would you be consolidating them, going by the principle that I just set out, so that they can be recited to the close by cooked food markets? That would also mean that we will not be wasting our land resources. Bureau Director, well, I think we also apply the same principle. We support that, so we will try to look into that more closely, very expeditiously, whether it's a CFB, whether it's a CFMs or CFHBs. So we will try to step up our efforts to either through improvement of the facilities, then their operation can be improved, or else we will try to vacate them as soon as possible. And the principle to be applied would be the same. That is, while we try to be people-based, in the process we also have to consider the possibility of consolidation. Chairman, when you have such policies, I hope that you will come back to the different panels of this council to consult members' views, because in this regard, we are trying to look at it from the value for money perspective. We would not be looking at the policy. It's just that we are mentioning this in passing. Yes, Chairman, I'm not sure if I put it correctly. Apparently, the Bureau Director is repeating himself. I noticed that, well, this is the macroscopic perspective, looking at the matters of principle, and therefore he would find it difficult to change his stance. I'm not trying to help him. I think you put it very nicely, and you should give him a chance to explain himself. But just now, another member, Paul Chair, also talk about the timing. The matter has been dragged on for too long, and I agree with his reply. Yet it seems that it has taken them too long to look into the matter. Why do I say this? Because FEHD in 2001 and 03 already said that they would have to review the situation to see how they can close down these Cheung Sha Wan CFM. And already it's 2015. We still haven't got specific measures and plan to do it. Would it be somewhat disappointing to us? So would it give rise to some skepticism as to whether the measures and also the direction would just remain in the study stage without being implemented? If that is the case, then for the so-called temporary CFMs, well, they might be temporary for 50 or for 30, 42 years or even 50, 60 years. Bureau Director, if Mr. Chen wants us to look at one of the examples, that is the Cheung Sha Wan CFM, then maybe I can provide you with further information. Or let me point out that the Cheung Sha Wan CFM, the vacancy rate is indeed relatively high. If you compare that with other CFHBs, well, they might be similarly high, but then relatively speaking, in terms of CFM, is on the high side. And at different times, we have actually considered different factors. I can also explain that to you. And during a particular time, that is in early year 2000, the vacancy rate was already quite high. And at that time, we consider how we should deal with it. But then there were also other on-street hawkers who had to be dealt with. That's why for the vacancy stores, we try to freeze them so as to use them to recite some of the on-street hawkers. But then the response was not that good. And then later, when we reconsider opening up these stores for auctioning, because this would be done by way of a tenancy agreements. In other words, the operators do not have to be licensed hawkers. But then by then, in terms of the facilities, in particular for power supply, is not adequate. And in fact, we are still not certain about whether we should close down this market. Because if there is a possibility to improve it, we do have the duty to improve it. That's why we are still looking into the possibility of upgrading the power supply in the market, so that for the remaining vacant stores, there would still be a chance for them to be let out to other operators who are interested by auction. Well, you will have to look at case 3. Well, Sham Shui Po is a very poor district at the time, so there was this demand. And back in year 2000, the entire economic environment in Hong Kong was bad. And today you are looking back with figures, but then we also have to put it in the historical context. In year 2000, we had the financial turmoil, and in year 2000 we had the SARS outbreak. So we ourselves also had to take a look into that, and the administration might wish to tell us the factual background. Maybe it's too long ago, that's why you've also forgotten. So you will have to see the justification for everything. The reason, well, some members question why the matter had been dragged on for so long. Well, that's because of the social environment, and that would also affect the local situation. And if you look at Sham Shui Po these days, it's very different from the past, and now Sham Shui Po has become a very affluent district. So you will have to explain that to members, because we have to look at the historical context in which it existed. Well, Chairman, I might not have made myself entirely clear. Well, my intention was to allow members to have a better understanding as to what happened.
And also why that the vacancy rates are high, unless, well, as we mentioned, means all a transitional arrangement, and particularly for the hawker bazaars. But for cooked food markets, the situation is different. It doesn't have the same historical background, and so we shouldn't close them down as soon as possible. We are obliged to, first of all, see whether there's room for improvement in these CFMs. And so we do hope that we can retain some places so that we can absorb the hawkers who used to work on the streets. And if there isn't good enough response from hawkers, then we'll open up the places to other people and enhance the facilities there. I'm sure there's room for improvement, that we can do that first. Yeah, Chairman, I'd like to speak on behalf of some store operators. It's not that I want to force them out. Why is it that, the Audit Commission report suggested scenarios in some food markets where there is not enough electricity supply, there's no air conditioning, or in need of repair and so forth. But I think this is a vicious cycle, because once you have positioned an area as a transitional arrangement, then once it's something temporary or transitional, then the operators would not be willing to actually spend on upgrading the site. So if you do nothing to the site, then of course the environment will be bad, and then that results in poor operations and also limited number of patrons. And there wouldn't be any people hoping or wanting to rent the stores either. So you can see that, as mentioned in the report, Pt1 Cook Food Center, the main reason for is limited tenants, is the lack of or inadequate supply of electricity. So how are you going to address this issue of an unfavorable operating environment so that the tenants would have a reasonable operating environment? They do pay rents. Secretary? I agree with Mr. Chen's point, and that's exactly what I tried to say. That I pointed out that in the Pt1 CFM, what we should do is to try to enhance the electricity supply there. This is something quite complicated. If you have to change the electricity setup, you need to look at the technical feasibility first. If it's feasible, and if we think there's the cost effectiveness there, we'll actually work on that first. Okay, I'll hand over the time to other members. Ken, you're finished, and Alan, can you move on to part 3? Kenneth? Okay, I'm not going to repeat what other members have said. Over the years, I've been to a number of cooked food centers, markets, or bazaars in Singapore, Orchard Road, near Holiday Inn, that is not to the Marriott side. On side streets on Orchard Road, a quite number of well-decorated hawker bazaars. There's no air conditioning, but you find that it's orderly, very clean, and it does attract a lot of tourists. Let's not to cite the example of Singapore time and again. Let's look at another city, Kuala Lumpur. Kuala Lumpur has a place called Central Market. In it, a number of cooked food centers, very clean, well managed. It's also a main tourist attraction. From what I heard today, I know the administration has several factors for consideration. I also heard about the historical reason, the hawker bazaars and the cooked food markets. I did discuss with various organizations in Hong Kong, even consul generals. They told us that they were very happy to go to eat at cooked food markets. But now, with all the issues associated, historical issues associated with all these markets, and also the issues surrounding hawker licenses, and then there are also suggestions made by Paul Chair and others. it's pointless to look backwards, right? I don't want to address the historical factor alone. That's the fact. We need to look at how, from now on, we can tackle the issues before us. I wouldn't rule out that there can be a basket of measures to give people an option or to give redundancy plans and so forth. I hope that when the time comes for relocation, there can be subsidy provided. I think what's most important is with the hawkers, whether we can enhance the cleanliness and hygiene and facilities there so that the cooked food markets can attract more people, and whether they are Hong Kong people or tourists or not, so that they can enjoy local delicacies. As a business person, I don't find it a very difficult problem to tackle. All you need is to spend some money. Maybe for centers, spend a few $1 million to upgrade its facilities, electricity or hygiene conditions, so that the centers in the coming 10 years or so maintain a large number of patrons, so that Hong Kong people and tourists will go there knowing that there are local delicacies there. As the Financial Secretary said, we can have the mobile food carts. That's one choice. These hawker stores are also another option. If you look back at page 14, looking at the environment there, store like that, even ordinary people in Hong Kong would not want to go there. You need to actually provide the basic facilities and to attract people to sit down and enjoy the meal. I think the secretary, I hope that you can consider not just look at the perspective of hawkers, but try to discuss with Tourism Commissioner, for example, to find ways to enhance the functions of these markets, and also those who are operating these markets would actually know that once the facilities are enhanced and the hygiene condition is improved, then these operators, even a 70-year-old hawker, may be actually willing to stay on and to work for another 10 years or so, instead of just leaving them there alone. I think this is a difference in our thinking, in comparison with the thinking of the Singaporean government. All along, I had contact with Singaporean officials, whether it's for direct investment or local policies. If you want to do something, if you can have collaborations with other government departments, you can actually find a way to release some sites and also enhance the appeal and efficiency of food markets and hawker bazaars. And these will be the mid-long-term solution. I know some hawkers may retire in 10 years. I'm not going to pick up the recommendations, because I would like to address this I want to look ahead from a business perspective, and I hope that officials can really think along that line. Thank you. Do you want to respond? Let me respond to all the points made. As I mentioned earlier, besides the hawker bazaars as a traditional arrangement, inevitably, they will be replaced. But for CFCs and CFMs, I think we should find ways to develop them. So in principle, even if these centers are not operating well, have a high vacancy rate, we should first of all look at the ways to improve them before considering other measures like consolidation. So in the report, you can find that is mentioned that we are fighting for resources to improve the facilities there. Okay, follow up. Secretary, even though you said that the hawker bazaars is something in transition, but I think they've been in transition for 20, 30 years. Even though it's transition in name, we still need to do something. You have 11 of these markets now with high market rates, as mentioned in Table 3. You can still consolidate them, but without ignoring the livelihoods of people with the hawkers with licenses. You can't just say that you can just leave it there and even bear with them even when there are no people going there. It's something really to the disadvantage of the operators. Now you have 11 of them. You may consolidate them into 6 or 7, and for those 6 bazaars, you need to greatly enhance the facilities there, enhance the functions. I don't believe that once they've got a news from the government that you're going to upgrade the facilities, they will give up on the license. Of course, your original intention is to encourage them to give up the license, but as you said, you want to be people-oriented, right? You don't want to force them to surrender the licenses. So why don't you just consolidate them and greatly enhance the appeal of these bazaars? Even though you said this is something in transition, you wouldn't want to guarantee that you would close them all in 10 years' time, right? So why wouldn't you just, like with the more than a decade left, allocate resources to, you don't have to open that many of them, but you can greatly enhance the functions of some of these bazaars in one go, instead of just leaving them there and leaving the sites there and just wait for the hawkers to surrender the licenses. That may not happen until 20 years later. That's my personal view. Kenneth, just in the Secretary, you said many times, maybe that's the view of the previous Secretary, just to, wait until people abandon the licenses. But as the Secretary said, how we can enhance the market environment, with the existing resources, to give a room of survival for the stakeholders, is one thing to consider. And another step would be to consider, as what you suggested, make it more business friendly. Link is a case where the government actually sold off our resources. All the money spent by Link on improving the look of the shopping malls, but is that something good for the society? Because the room of survival for people, or of some other previous store owners have been affected. So maybe we can see whether the government can, that's the government policy, work. The government's policy is also to enhance the appeal of the markets. Secretary, I want to refer to page 23, paragraph B. When there are resources available, we can rationalize provision of stores in CFHBs. And there are also cases cited where money has been allocated to carry out enhancement works. Well, Chairman, we're not talking about government. We're not talking about Link. Well, Link is a bad example to me. I think Link and the government are two totally different organizations. Please don't misunderstand me. Well, I'm just saying that the government can also improve on the facilities without going down the route of Link. Sometimes different markets have different needs. Alan, please, maybe we can go on to part 3. Before we go into part 3, I think in part 2, I want to do a wrapping up. Since the 1970s, when our government decided not to issue new hawker licenses, the cooked food hawker bazaars, have seen a reduction in the number of users. That must be the case because that's the starting point. So from the value for money perspective, No, okay, it's been more than 40 years and yet we haven't resolved the matter. So that to me is a sign of very, very low efficiency. And in many hawker bazaars, they are located in prime spots, that has the potential for very, very expensive rents. In Appendix D, page 69, some are actually in temporary spots for more than up to 42 years in temporary places since 1972. Like in the case of Stanley Market and so forth. Some dates back to 73, 77, 82, 83, 84. So it's been 30 years, Chairman. And we also mentioned that some cooked food markets, hawker bazaars, are 3 to 4 minute distance away from each other. I think the government, no matter how, needs to actually work on the issue. Otherwise, for us, as members of the PAC, we would adopt or actually level a harsh criticism at the Bureau. I think I don't need to stress this anymore. I've said it time and again. But we've also got the guarantee from Secretary Cole that he wouldn't use the PAC report, an audit report, recommendations in relation to ensuring value for money to to actually support some harsh policies. I think this should be put on record, that the administration is not going to do that. But despite the guarantee from the Secretary, we still need to, from the value for money perspective, express very grave concern about the points made, issues pointed out in the report, Audit Commission report, because these hawkers, in the time years ahead, the number of hawkers will only decrease, and it's cost them more than 40 years to try to rationalize the situation, and yet there hasn't been any policy that can actually ensure effective allocation of resources, public resources. I think that's a pity. So, Secretary, you may not be able to respond anymore immediately now, but when we write our report, if the Secretary or the Permanent Secretary or or with the help from the Director as well can provide more information on your stance on how to tackle this issue that has lingered for 40 years, if you have any roadmap, timeline, and so forth, please include them. And when we draw our conclusion, we would actually make a reference to them and suggest or write about more what we can do in the time ahead instead of just criticizing you. So before we go into part 3, Chairman, do you think it's appropriate now for the Secretary to respond briefly to my points just made? Okay, that's Mr. Liang's observation, but that actually represents the view of the committee. So I hope that you can provide us with more information. As I said, we're covering what happened before. This is a livelihood issue that we're talking about. So back in those days, decades ago, just in your report, please give us more information.
Over the last 40 years, what have you done to improve the welfare of the public? If you can provide any information with regards to policy development then we will have a better picture of our developments going ahead. I gave an overall response just now. What you and Mr. Leung said really reflects the administration's stance. After this meeting, we will see if any further information can be supplemented. The nature of this issue in terms of policy and public welfare, we will try our best to offer more information. From a development perspective, Mr. Alan Leung, that our two working groups cannot cover all the issues we are talking about today. So I propose the relevant electrical panels to discuss our work going forward, and the electrical can continue to follow up on that. With regards to what the Secretary just said, I'm not trying to isolate these scopes of work from the existing working groups on food and environmental hygiene. What I was saying is that those two working groups cannot cover everything mentioned in the audit report. So for cooked food centers, we can tackle part of the issue through the public market review. But since Hong Kong is a food paradise, we have so many excellent chefs and picky eaters. The government has to do something with the issues. And since the Secretary is determined to review policies on hawkers and public markets, you are in possession of 11 pieces of prime land. You should angle for resources within the government, and you should have considerable bargaining power, because you can deploy these 11 cooked food hawker bazaars in a flexible manner. So you have 11 aces on hand, and I've read your reports, and you said you would take a bottom-up approach, and you would seek advice from the district councils and so on. I think this audit report actually helps with your work. We are talking about very valuable cooked food hawker bazaars. You should lobby to different government departments, and you have a very valid ground, and you have good bargaining power as well. So perhaps I won't go into that anymore. In terms of vacancy rates, we have 11 transitional hawker bazaars. The average vacancy rate is 61%. For the other facilities, the vacancy rates are very low. It's just 6 or 7%. So the problem is not big there. And as the Secretary said, this is a transitional policy. Well, or we can call it a short-term policy for these transitional hawker stores. So please enter part 3. As the chairman has reminded us oftentimes, the PAC doesn't serve to just intimidate government officials. We are talking about making the best use of public resources and adopting a value for money approach. And this audit report showed that in one specific type of cooked food policy, the use of public resources is not optimal. So that's the conclusion. And such conclusions can help the relevant bureaus and secretaries to angle for more resources in order to enhance the policy. I'm sure Dr. Ko is very active in promoting the policy. So finally, we are entering part 3. I don't think it will take a long time, the remaining parts of the report. We've seen these issues before on air conditioning systems and rates, but please be assured that we can finish on time today. I hope the Secretary is not too indulged in cooked food hawker bazaars. We still have 2 other types of cooked food facilities. We have cooked food markets and cooked food centers as well. When we consider fire safety measures, air conditioning systems, and other facilities, I hope the Secretary understands that our focus is not just on cooked food hawker bazaars. These hawker bazaars are going to be are just waiting to be eliminated. The other 2 types of facilities are more important. When we talk about air conditioning systems, the chairman should be aware that these facilities are even more important for cooked food markets and centers. We have to improve their business environment to enhance their appeal to the public and attract more patrons. And for for part 3, I have a question on paragraph 3.5. And for subsequent to the 2003 meeting, the FEHD reviewed the fire safety measures at CFCs and public markets selling wet and dry goods, and drew up a plan to upgrade their fire safety measures. And this implementation plan did not cover CFHBs or CFMs. So my question is, why weren't they covered? These facilities have fire hazards as well. Why did these fire safety measures not cover CFHBs and CFMs? And do you have any plans to deal with these CFHBs and CFMs in terms of fire safety? Secretary, please. Chairman, perhaps I think I can only give an overall response. And in terms of fire safety measures and other measures for these markets, we would do our best to improve their conditions. And we have to consider the specific operating environment at each facility. And in terms of retrofitting and upgrading facilities, whether they are whether it's suitable for all facilities. And after the 2003 meeting, perhaps the director can explain more on why these measures do not cover two specific types of facilities. Perhaps you can refer to the information in Appendix B. And the earliest commissioning date was 1984. The speaker is off the microphone. Chairman, as I said, after the meeting in 2003 with relevant departments, our focus was on cooked food centers and some cooked food markets. And looking back, the progress we made might not be satisfactory enough. And for cooked food hawker bazaars, we had to consider fire hazards. And as I explained, cooked food hawker bazaars are usually not enclosed buildings, and they often adopt open designs, and sometimes they are caged. So in terms of fire safety hazards, they are often more vulnerable than enclosed buildings and multi-story hazards. Rather, the hazard is lower. So at that time, we decided to focus our resources on improving enclosed buildings and multi-story structures. Having read the audit report, as I mentioned in my opening speech, we got in touch with EMSD and FSD immediately to enhance our work on cooked food hawkers bazaars, and under the 6 so-called minimum requirements. And during our initial visits with the relevant departments, we identified certain difficulties. For hawker bazaars with relatively more simplistic facilities, if the bazaars are not equipped with ventilation systems, we cannot install an automatic switch system. So we would adopt a more pragmatic manner in conducting visits with other departments, and if they have any technical recommendations, we would proceed with our work as soon as possible. I ask you to refer to Appendix D, Director. We can look at the issue market by market. You can explain why things cannot be done at each market. If you give such a generic answer, it's you're hardly helping us to draft the report. When you look at the Stanley Market Open Space Hawker Bazaar, you said you could not do anything, but you should provide more information. And you should provide more justifications. We wouldn't accept your answer in our report. We look at each case in a very thorough manner. So you are obliged to offer us those information so that we can draft the report. Safety is of utmost importance, and money is not an excuse. We are talking about lives here. If you don't have such information on hand, you should go through the list again and later tell us why you didn't perform upgrades. Or can you say anything now? Perhaps you can share the information with us later. Ellen, I'd like to talk about Table 6. For CFHBs, CFMs, and CFCs, the cooked food centers perform relatively well, and 30 cooked food centers satisfied all 6 requirements, and 8 cooked food centers fulfill 5 of the requirements, and 1 center fulfilled 4 of the requirements. So this situation is rather satisfactory. The situation is not so well for cooked food markets. We have 25 such markets right now, and only 3 of them fulfill all 6 requirements, and 9 fulfill 5 requirements, and together they make up less than half of the total. So it's not satisfactory. The director mentioned in her opening speech that she would work with the Fire Services Department in order to improve their work. And I think the Secretary understands that from the PAC's perspective, these fire hazards are rather serious. When you look at page 27, a lot of gas containers are placed in cooked food centers, and they have open kitchens and so on. So we are quite worried. Chairman, you requested more information from the director, and I agree with that. I think it's necessary. We would be more picky in terms of measures to combat fire hazards. Going forward, we'd like to see more concrete proposals from you, and if they are accepted by the PAC, then we can have a more balanced perspective going forward. I hope the director understands our position on this issue. If the Secretary has nothing more to add, I'd like to talk about the electricity supply. When you look at case 4 in page 31, the Kwun Tong Ferry Concourse CFM was mentioned, and as at December 2014, the CFM had 29 stores which had all been let to operators. Because of inadequate electricity supply for CFM, each store could only secure 10 amperes, falling short of the 60 ampere standard. Since 2008, electricity outages at the CFM had been noted from time to time, and from 1st of March to 20th of June 2008, over the span of 112 days, there were 12 electricity outages, and each time the supply was interrupted from 10 minutes to 2 hours. And I am sure there would be refrigerators and cold meats, and they probably had gone bad if there's no electricity for 2 hours. So my question for the Secretary is, if given the unstable electricity supply at the cooked food markets, it's unsatisfactory to both the patrons and operators. And on the inadequate supply of electricity supply, would the departments or bureaus have anything to say to the PAC to reassure us?
So that you can ensure that for these CFMs and CFCs, they would not have such undesirable situation whereby there would be power outages. Director? Well, for the Kwun Tong Ferry Concourse CFM, it was actually built in 1984, so it's now 31 years old. And initially, when it was first built, there was never this expectation that the power loading would be such high. That's why in 2008, we already approached the ASD to see how we can improve the power supply situation, and according to the advice from the ASD, we will have to build an additional off-site transformer room in order to increase the power supply. But then in doing that, as the Kwun Tong Ferry Concourse CFM is a 2-story building, and therefore in order to do this within the venue, the only feasible way is to reduce the number of stalls in order to vacate a space for the construction of this additional transformer room. But then, as the Kwun Tong Ferry Concourse CFM, the current letting rate is very high. All the stalls have been let out. That's why we are not able to identify sufficient space within the concourse to build the transformer room. That's why we have also discussed with the ASD, and the current approach is to work with the power company as well as the ASD so as to see what can be done without reducing the number of stalls so that we can increase the power supply. We have already started to step up our discussion with the power company as well as the relevant departments. But then, as I said just now, there are certain circumstances in which we can see that in some of the cooked food venues, they are able to meet the power standards. Well, the rate is not high, and for the two that are able to meet the standards, one is a newly built venue, then of course we will apply the latest standards. But then for those that were built in the past, technically speaking, indeed there would be some technical difficulties. As stated in the audit report, there were other examples involving the installation of air conditioning, but then because of the inadequate power supply, it was not feasible. So we will have to resort to other ways and means to resolve this problem. Director, can you provide the correspondence between you and the SD so that we can take a look at those exchanges? Chairman, with regard to inadequate or substandard power supply, as a result of that, Changsha 1 CFM cannot be let out, and that's the conclusion of the audit. And according to the audit report, the power shortage problem will become more serious in the future because power companies are publicizing the use of electroplate for cooking. So if you're not able to identify a space for the construction of a transformer room, then are you telling these CFCs or CFMs not to use any electric appliance or electrical appliances? They can use open fire to cook food, or they'll have to wait for you to come up with this additional power supply facility. And if you can refer to table 7 on page 32 of the English version, altogether we have 64 CFMs and CFCs, and only 2 are able to meet the minimum standard with 60 amperes of power supply. And then out of the CFMs, none of the 25 is able to do it, and for 30 to 50, so 23 are only able to supply below 29, and only 2 are able to provide up to 30 to 59. And for the best model, so 29 would be below 29. So given the difficult situation, and if you do not have space for the building of a transformer room, then what is going to happen? So how can that be resolved? Well, I was referring to the Kwun Tong Ferry Concourse CFM. Indeed, if we were to upgrade the power supply installation, then we will have to take up additional space, and the relevant cooked food venues if they are already fully let out, then there would be some difficulties. But then the situation is, when we look at past records for venues with appropriate conditions, we have also upgraded the electricity installations. And in the past, in some markets, we also require them to install air conditioning, because initially when they were first commissioned, there was no air conditioning. But then if we are able to overcome the technical difficulties or constraints, then we would try our best to do it. So in table 7, yes, there are quite a large number of cooked food venues which might not have been able to meet the latest electricity standards. In reality, given the current situation where some of the venues are substandard, we have already worked our very best. So for 60 ampules, this is the existing standards. So for the newly built ones, we will adopt that as our standard. But then for the older venues, wherever we are able to upgrade the standards, so long as we are able to resolve the problems, and with the support of the tenants and store operators, we are always willing to do it. Well, Chairman, I'd like to know this. Well, when it comes to Changsha 1, according to the audit, in 2010, the power company already agrees that there can be an additional underground cable that can be paved in order to resolve the problem. But then is it that the FEHD has not worked in coordination with the power company, and as a result, up till now, almost 5 years later, the Changsha 1 cooked food markets letting out rate is still quite low, so some 16 stores are still being frozen. So why is it the case? Because it's not that the power company is not willing to do it, or that it is subjected to some objective circumstances resulting in the power company not being able to build the transformer room. But then it's the FEHD which is not willing to do it. Is that the case? So he's referring to case 5. Well, on case 5, Changsha 1 CFM, as the Bureau Director just said, at different times, there were different reasons. So within the market, there are some stores which have been frozen, and the latest position is that back in 2012, the RHS department was aware that the power supply needed to be upgraded in this market. But then in order to do that, a major renovation work will have to be carried out before the upgrading works can proceed. And a practical consideration was that, for the relevant venue, as it's a temporary site. So in the end, if we were to carry out a major refurbishment project, then in terms of its viability, would that be okay? And at about the same time, within the Sham Shui Po District Council, there was also a discussion on the long-term arrangement for the Changsha 1 CFM. We also had to bear that in mind. That's why in terms of the upgrading of the power supply work, it was suspended. Chairman, that's why earlier on, I specifically put it to Dr. Koh, given the fact that he has been so positive in responding to the review of public markets and hawker policy. All these issues can be taken on board together. If you're able to look at it as a basket of issues, then you might be able to be more flexible in your approach. And when you strive to get more resources from the central government, I'm sure Mrs. Chair would be more experienced than I do. So if you really want to be politically accountable, if you're responsible for a particular policy, and if you are really trying your best to do it, and given the audit report, and you're also sitting on many prime sites where they are being used as cooked food centers and markets, and some of these CFMs are also located in variable sites, then if under your review of your hawker policy and public markets, there can also be some synergy effect achieved. So given that, I think it would make the whole thing a lot easier to deal with. Instead of just focusing on, say, Changsha 1 or cooked food market, then it might be somewhat more difficult. It will be hard for you to be flexible about your approach. So before we compile our report, can we give a little thought to this, so that when we assess the value for money exercise in terms of the resources being put into it, whether or not you have been able to put them to the best and efficient use? So Bureau Director, would you think that what I just said would not be too far from the target? Dr. Koh? All right, Mr. Leung is suggesting that if we have an overall policy direction, then when we strive for resources to improve the situation, then if we have a strong policy backing, then that would be more effective. I agree. But then, of course, we have to look at the overall situation as well as the individual circumstances. For example, taking Changsha 1 as an example, all right, the development has not been set. So I would also directly take it up with the Development Bureau, so that we would like to know as quickly as possible as to the future direction. That would make it easier for me to decide whether we need to fight for additional resources to help this specific CFM to improve its facilities. Yes, Mr. Leung. Chairman. Well, last but not least, on this particular chapter, we can see that 3.23c in the government's response, the government did mention that the FEHD will establish guidelines in consultation with relevant departments on the use of electrical appliances. And then in 3.28, we can see that according to the audit, there are some operators in markets who have installed standalone air conditioners for their own stores without getting prior approval. So I'd like to see if my understanding of the witness evidence is correct. That is, before they are able to upgrade the power supply standards. They would be looking at the guidelines of what electrical appliances can be used, and they will also try to tackle the problem of installation of standalone air conditioners by the operators as a temporary stopgap measure to deal with the situation before the installations can be upgraded. Is that right? Dr. Koh, that's my understanding. Yes, Alan? Okay, for this set of ad hoc interim guidelines is a stopgap measure. When will they be out? Before we compile our report, can we be given a more specific draft? Do you have a timetable? We'll try our best. We'll try our best. So if you have one, then please pass it on to me. All right, if you don't have anyone, then you can just let us know, or when you can have it ready. Chairman, can I ask to have a break of 15 minutes? Yes, but because having a break for 15 minutes might enable us to go faster afterwards. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
休息15分鐘好嗎?
All right, let's take a break of 15 minutes because we're short of a quorum. We only have 3 members here.
3個會一齊進行啦，即係我哋。
We now have 3 meetings going on simultaneously.